Okay. Well, what you've written here is that today you're an entrepreneur and author, BBC guest broadcaster. So just tell me a bit about that, Carole.
BBC guest broadcaster. Well,
that sounds very interesting.
Yeah, I have actually, I've been working in the field of stress for many, many years. And I've now got to the situation where the BBC will contact me and say, if something breaks in the news, and they'll contact me and say, what's your opinion on? And then you have to give a sound bite, because everything is in sound bites. You give a sound bite to whatever it is. So therefore it could be workplace bullying, it could be how to reduce stress, it could be an employee who's suing an organization, right across the board. So
what have been your latest sound bites? What have you...
when we were discussing workplace bullying, and that was high profile in the news, I had LBC calling me one afternoon when I had friends over, LBC calling me and saying, can you speak about workplace bullying and what are the signs and symptoms and what should we do about it? And those are the kind of things that happen. And they basically, the press keep your name on a list and they make contact.
So something like the Dominic Raab accusations.
Exactly so. Exactly.
Right. I don't know what's happened to that. I haven't heard.
I don't know what's happened to it, but my opinion on generic what is bullying all about, or how can you recognize bullying behavior, is something that we did discuss.
So do you think it's more prevalent in the workplace, or people are just identifying it more?
I think it probably is more prevalent now. I think that because bearing in mind that there's so many people working really, really hard, I think individuals don't necessarily know how to manage their teams of people. So they end up shouting and screaming at them and putting them down in public, which equals bullying behavior. And they don't necessarily appreciate people and recognize them and value them. So really, I would say, is it more prevalent today? In many ways, it is.
And do you think, what was I going to, I was going to ask you something, but I can't remember now, but it was, it's being called out more anyway, you're saying.
It is, there's still, put it this way, there's still a stigma about stress and mental health in industry. There really is still a stigma. We've moved a long way. We've done very, very much better, but we've still got a long way to go. So our employees speaking up more about stress, to some extent they are, but they're still concerned about the repercussions if they do speak up about experiencing stress.
And has the legislation followed it? I mean, do you think, has there been an update in legislation?
Yeah, the HSE support what is going on. I mean, if you have more than 5 employees, you need to conduct a stress risk assessment, and organizations have stress policies. So this is the kind of work that I do in terms of working alongside the HSE. So part of my role is not just working in industry, a part of my role is actually chair of a stress and mental health charity. And with that in mind, so therefore employees will make contact with us and say, what should we do about?
Can you tell us a bit about your charity? Because that sounds very interesting.
Yes, it's called the International Stress Management Association. It was established over 35 years ago, not by myself. It's international. I was appointed in the year 2000 as its chair. I then stood down in between when I was actually working in the Middle East, and then came back, and I actually established International Stress Awareness Day in 1998. And to recognize its 20th anniversary, I established International Stress Awareness Week, and that's the first week in November. It's in the diary, and as soon as it starts getting to October time, the media will contact us and say, what are you doing? We send out press releases. And so therefore, yes, it's the aim is it around the world is to raise the profile and to do our best to reduce the stigma of experiencing stress and to bring about a healthy workplace culture, which organizations don't necessarily have.
Is it well supported internationally?
It is. We have quite a few branches now. We have 8 branches around the world. You'll find that it sort of pops up in most unusual places. Because I did a lot of work in the Middle East, so a lot of my Middle East clients have actually picked it up and run with it. So therefore, people will see it as an opportunity to raise their head above the parapet and talk about stress and stress reduction and increasing health and well-being. And so therefore, yes, it has increased over the years.
And how do you feel, what was which country did you mostly work in the Middle East?
I worked mostly in Dubai and then Abu Dhabi and Qatar. And so those were the main countries that I was working with in that time. But it was a 10-year period years ago. And there was over 10 years that I worked out there, not all the time. I was working here. I still have my family here, my partner here. But also at the same time, I would be working out there. So going out there for maybe 2 to 3 weeks at a time, then coming back to the UK and then going out there again. And I even got to the point where I used to write for one of the national newspapers called Gulf News. And for 8 years, I actually wrote a column on stress reduction, and tried to raise its profile in the Middle East. And actually, I have to say, it was successful. And I was given a lot of respect, which I wasn't sure how I was going to go down in the Middle East. No female, quite direct. But I gave a lot of presentations in conferences, and also, as I say, did the writing in the column as well.
And how does gender work into the workplace in Middle Eastern countries? I mean,
I haven't been out there now for the past 5 years when gender is really raising its head in this country. So I would say I can't answer that specifically. Certainly then it was in a situation where we weren't discussing it then. Now we are. Now it's very much top of our agenda. What it's actually like in the Middle East, bearing in mind, Eleanor, I haven't been out there for the past 5 years, which is where we've actually been talking more about gender over here. So I can't answer that. My thinking is it's probably pretty similar to how it was all those years ago. That would be my thinking.
And what was it like? I mean, was there a glass ceiling, or could women?
Yeah, there is a glass ceiling. Well, there's a glass ceiling over here to some extent as well. So therefore, was there a glass ceiling in the Middle East? Yes, there was. People would get in contact with me and say, could I train women? I did a lot of women's training programs to help them to speak in public, because they really wanted women to be representing their organizations when they went to conferences. So therefore, I had various women would make contact and say, I'm going to be telling me after I've trained them, I'm going to be going to XYZ conference, and really very excited about it. And I took that as a great compliment. The fact is that I was able to get to encourage people to learn how to speak, and to speak up and to speak out, and to be remembered for all the right reasons.
I noticed I heard on the radio I imagine it's the president or prime minister of Taiwan is a woman, which is, I think she's on a tour of America at the moment.
It's good to see its progress. It is. It is certainly progress. It's certainly progress. So therefore, you can say that it's going in the right direction. But there are many countries, I do a lot of work, as you know, in South Africa. There are many countries which are still steeped in history, still steeped in the past. And, that hasn't started there at all. So it depends on which part of the world that you're working in as to how different situations are seen.
Did you have any specific training for this, of speaking in public, or I had a speaker coach years ago, but I have to say, Eleanor, it was been learning on the job. It really has. So a speaker coach. You had a good tutor on the job.
It's, you watch yourself on video, you critique yourself, you think, oh my, I can't bear this, I can't bear that, all those sorts of things. And it's not so much about like, how's your hair? It's more about how did I come over? And how am I speaking too quickly, which is what I tend to do. And I have to slow myself up. And it's those, and I tend to walk on platform. I tend to pace on platform. So now I'm very careful when I'm on platform, which is not to pace up and down. So it has certainly been the last 20 years. It has certainly been learning on the job.
Well done you. Can you talk a bit about your background and growing up and schooling and family?
Yes, it was my father died when I was 5. So therefore, I grew up in a one-parent family, which was actually very unusual at the time. So when I used to go to school and my friends would talk about mothers and fathers, I could only talk about my mother. And it was then, nobody got divorced in those days. And this wasn't a divorce situation either way. It was very much one-parent family. And I know that I always felt very different. I was very fortunate to have my mum's sister and her husband, who was a doctor. So they were very supportive and very, very influential in my growing up. And my mother always believed in traveling, not that we had huge amounts of money, but instead of going down to the Green Park in Bournemouth, she'd say, no, we're going to take a coach trip to Italy and Rome. And she really encouraged me to think about what's going on around the world. And I think
the eldest.
Say again?
Were you the eldest?
No, I was the middle. I am the middle. And we're all very different. We're all very, very different. I am certainly the driven one. My other sisters aren't quite in the same way. But it's, yes, it's interesting because I am a teacher, because I'm a trainer, and my children are trainers, teachers. And my grandfather was the headmaster of the first Jewish boys' school in the East End. So if I track it back through to my history, my niece is a teacher, sisters are, daughter, son. I mean, I have 3 children, and it's really it's in the genes. There's no question of that.
Was your grandfather English born, or what?
No, he was Russian. He lived in Russia. He was in Russia and came over here.
And he rose to be headmaster.
He did.
That's marvellous.
Yeah,
right.
That was something that is. Yeah.
Was that the JFS?
No. It was a school in East London, which is now no longer there.
And what do your sisters do? Do you think
one's a teacher? Yeah. One's a teacher, and one does design. So we're all very, very different. All very different.
And do you think your mother? The example of your mother as a single parent, do you think it shaped your ideas as well?
I think it has. I personally feel it has. I miss her dreadfully. She died years ago because she had a really good, sound opinion, and I really respected her advice. And I think that it's in a situation where it is a one-parent family and things were not easy for us. Certainly you had to, in some ways, sink or swim, and you had to really overcome the challenges that there were at the time and to manage it accordingly. So does it shape you? I think it does. I really do. Yeah.
And you went to Hasmonean, didn't you?
I did indeed. Yes, that was.
Did you go
I learnt my Hebrew.
Did you go on to university?
No, I didn't. I didn't go on to university. My studying came after I got married. I got married at 19, very young, and divorced at 35. So I got married very young and then had children very young. So my eldest daughter is 21. So I studied at Birkbeck College. I studied psychology. That's where my studying came in. And from there, I went on to train to be a counsellor. Then I was a Samaritan for over 20 years. And then started working in industry, because when I was 35, it was a needs must. I could no longer afford to stay in the voluntary sector. I then had to pay a mortgage and had to look after 3 children. And so therefore it was at that point that I thought, well, I've just got to get myself a business somehow. And so I rocked up in industry and would say, I'm a counsellor. They say, yeah, lovely. And I said, I've been a Samaritan for 20 years. They say, very, very nice, lovely, lovely. They didn't do anything. So I just really had to work really hard to find people who would listen to me. And I was given a break. I was given a simple break that somebody said to me, are you used to running training courses? So I was thinking to myself, well, I haven't run training courses before, but I've done a lot of work with the Women's Campaign for Soviet Jewry. I was used to opening my mouth and speaking and training people, trained people at the Samaritans. So I remember saying, yes, no problem. And that's where it started. It was as simple as that. So it was that opportunity. It's like with a lot of things, you find a door and you have to kick it open to actually make something happen. Otherwise, I could have easily have said, no, I don't really do that. Yeah. It's just me thinking, say yes first, and let's deal with the challenges after that.
Can you talk a bit about the campaign for Soviet Jewry? Because I think you and your ex-husband really had quite a well, I remember you telling me, but if you talk about it in your own words.
Yeah, sure. It's 1979. I remember a friend of mine from Hasmonean said to me when we had a play date for the kids, and said to me, I said to her, what are you doing tomorrow? And she said to me, I'm going on a demonstration. So I said, oh, I thought it must be a makeup demonstration. I didn't know what she was talking about. So she said, no, it's a demonstration, and we're campaigning to help refuseniks, people who tried to leave Russia, prisoners of Zion, to leave the country, and they weren't able to leave at that time. So therefore she said, why don't you come with? So I said, I've got a child in a pram, Lisa's in a pram. And so she said, oh, bring the pram with, and we'll put a placard in the pram and she can hold the placard, which she did. Well, 10 years later, I was still working. I then became an activist, a very strong activist. I had my own group called the Brent 35s. I traveled to Russia on 5 occasions. I was arrested on one of those occasions together with my ex-husband. And it was probably one of the most rewarding times of my life. And what it taught me, you could never read in a book. You really couldn't. Organizing demonstrations.
Were you frightened when you went? I mean, they were detaining people, not that often, but you heard of English.
I was detained. We were split up, and I didn't go back into Russia again. I wasn't allowed back in there again. So to answer your question, yes, it was, don't say no, you get caught up with it. You get caught up so much with the fact that you want to help people. You've got to take things out to people because they need the money and they need the clothes that they can sell in order to live. You were so caught up with that. And my ex-husband was a chartered accountant, and he did we had all our names and addresses of people to go and see, and that was all coded. So even if we were stopped at customs, which we were, they find a pile of numbers. It didn't mean anything to anybody. It didn't mean anything to me either, but then he had to translate them. So we had to deal with all of that. And there were occasions when we were followed. It was fact, because, as a tourist, as a Westerner, you weren't meant to go into Russia. You weren't meant to go into the Soviet Union. It's the Soviet Union then, not Russia. Just to meet people. You could go to the museums.
Yeah.
Absolutely, but you weren't going to, you shouldn't go to meet people. And the people that we met would say to us things like, we choose to see you. We know it's risky for them, not for me, because all that's going to happen to me is they're going to chuck me out. That's the worst thing they were going to do, is put me on a plane and go home, which happened to various people that I used to brief. But as far as the refuseniks were concerned, they were the ones that were taking the risk. It wasn't us taking the risk. I'd be thrown out, okay. They would sometimes end up in prison the day later for X amount of short period of time because they met a foreigner, because they met a Westerner. And that was fact, and that's what they chose to do. And when I'd say to them, and I'd say, Edward, do you really want to see us because this could be risky for you? And they'd say, Carole, I choose to see you. And if they want to bang me up into prison for a few days afterwards, just to say you've done wrong, I'll accept that risk. And it was the most phenomenal time of my life, phenomenal time.
Did you keep in touch with any of them?
Yes, I'm still in contact with Sharansky. I'm in contact with. I'm with Edward Markov. Yeah. And in fact,
would you be in touch with Sharansky when he was in Russia?
No. Since he's been in Israel.
Oh, I see.
He's been in Israel, and I work, and a good friend of mine is Risa Ika, who heads up the 35s. Who head up the 35s, and she and I see each other regularly. She's a suburb girl, lady, and so we see each other on a regular basis. And so therefore we're always talking about what Sharansky is doing this, and I have lots of names that just roll off the tongue. And so therefore via her as well, I keep in contact. But if ever there's a time that you felt you were doing something important, this was about people's lives. And it was just so important that you did what you did, and you behaved yourself when you were out there, because you have no help or benefit to the refuseniks if you were sent home. So you had to do your very, very best. So yes, we were followed, and yes, we behaved ourselves. And the time when we were arrested, our trip completely had to stop, because it meant that we were being watched by the KGB, and it meant that people were not going to, it was too dangerous. It was too dangerous for them, not for us.
Where did most of the refuseniks go once they were able to get out? Did they go to Israel, or?
They would go to Israel, they'd go to America, they'd come here, right across the board. Not everybody went to Israel, but I have to say most people would want to go to Israel.
And what is Sharansky like? I mean, I remember thinking he'd be an enormous man, and then this little fellow walked across the bridge.
Diminutive.
Well, I think in one's mind, he
became the, if you like, he became the role, the role that we would all follow. He would become the person that we would say, it's all about Sharansky. It wasn't all about Sharansky. Sharansky carried the baton for everybody else who was in refusal. That's what happened at that time. But now, as he would say now, he says that there are countless other people. And I remember when he eventually came out and he walked over Glenaker Bridge, and there was a swap at that time. And we watched him from the 35's office. It was like a disused warehouse. We watched him walk over Glenaker Bridge, and there's all cheers and cheers. We had the media getting our reactions as to what it was like when he was walking over Glenaker Bridge. And I can remember that even to this very day. And when he came over months later, and I said,
to England. You mean to England? Yeah.
Because we invited him. And I remember saying to Rita Eker, I said, Rita, we've got to do something for Sharansky. We've got to do something for Sharansky for when he comes over. And she said to me, well, that's fine. And she said, what do you suggest? I said, why don't we do something like, let's take the Albert Hall. And in Rita's inimitable way, she'd say to me, fine, Carole, do it. And we did. Not just me, we did it. So there's Sharansky, this diminutive figure on the center stage in the Albert Hall. And he gave thanks to everybody that supported him, and particularly recognized with other people the 35s, the women's campaign.
That's very rewarding. Did he talk in the Albert Hall or take
questions?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it wasn't just wheeled out to say hello. He would really, yeah.
How marvelous. What a result.
Yeah. So that was an amazing time.
What else would you particularly like to talk about today? I mean, what do you say the Samaritan work? How is that?
I was a Samaritan. I'd like to talk about South Africa as well, but let's just talk about the Samaritans. I was a Samaritan for over 20 years, and I was a trainer at the Samaritans as well, but mainly on, volunteer on the phones. And I have to say that was an extremely important time for me. I learned so much. You talk about learning on the job. There's nothing, you do that, you absolutely do that. And you pick up the phone to somebody who's desperate or just lonely. I'm not saying just lonely, who is lonely, or somebody who's desperate. And you're there, the one phone call away from them thinking about possibly taking their life, or just feeling very lonely at night, or whatever that may well be. And so I worked there for 20 years. Through the Samaritans, I then worked at Wordwood Scrubs. And I worked there as a prison visitor. And we also, at the time, we used to train prisoners to become listeners. So therefore, the prisoners themselves, they have on their backs, they have T-shirts calling themselves the listeners. And we trained them to know how to listen to other people.
And so was that through Samaritans?
That was all through the Samaritans.
Really?
All through the Samaritans.
So was it male prisoners only?
Yeah. We're Wordwood Scrubs, it's all male.
Yes. And did you feel at all shaky going in there?
No, I have to say the screws are out there. You don't feel shaky. It's very daunting. You go through these doors that are sort of that thick. The sound of the keys is exactly as you imagine it to be. I mean, I'd had to pinch myself and think, what am I doing here? And the way you have to dress, obviously you just dress very conservatively, and you'd always go with somebody else. So I always went with my friend Ron, and that is what we did. And that went over a period of time. Then also through the Samaritans, I went to Serbia during the 1990s, and I trained humanitarian workers and George Soros Foundation humanitarian aid workers, and also counseled some of the refugees that were coming into Serbia. So it was through the Samaritans and the link. You just couldn't walk into Belgrade at that time.
No.
And I remember at that time, I took the very, very first plane from the UK into Belgrade. So much so that there's 3 of us on the plane. So much so that the air hostess said, "Oh, come on, everybody, come to the front, come to the front. You can all come in first class." I thought, "Oh, wow, that's nice," because there's nobody else here. So 3 of us rock up at Belgrade Airport. I was collected by the Samaritans in Novi Sad, and they came to collect me. That's where I stayed, and I ran training courses on about 5 times I went out.
Was the war going on at that time?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So you were going into a war zone, or
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you scared then?
I don't really get scared. I just do it. It's a bit like scared is an emotion. I was excited. I wanted to do it. If I want to do something that badly, fear factor like doesn't have any meaning. And I've always been the person. So that was an amazing time. And it was just having groups of people that I was working with, training, giving them support, talking to refugees. You don't really think, Eleanor, about, am I scared? You do it. And you get caught up with it. And it's so important. And they're looking at you to make a difference to them. So that's just become so important.
Did you go, for how long were you there in Serbia?
1990s. So I'd finished. I'd stopped working in the former Soviet Union. So because that was I started working there in 79 all through the 80s. And the 1990s, I worked out in Serbia. And I'm not saying, again, it wasn't all the time. It was very much run a training course, deliver it. And it wasn't easy to get out there. I remember seeing, you were watching on TV, the stories of what was going on in the Civil War, thinking, what can I do? I'm a trained trauma debriefer. I must be able to do something rather than look at it on TV and think to myself, oh gosh, it's terrible. And it was through the Samaritans. I remember reading a magazine called Befrienders International, which is the international arm of the Samaritans. And I was sitting on duty, and I remember I was on reading on duty, and I remember people saying to me, "Oh, read this, read this." And I thought, do you know something? I'm going to make contact with the chair of the Samaritans at Novi Sad in Serbia and to see if I can do anything to help. And it didn't happen just like that. I didn't get my visa. I was refused my visa, and I had to have trips cancelled. In the end, I actually got out there and went out there 5 times. And that was right throughout the 1990s.
And did you go, when you were there, did you set up groups? I mean, something to leave behind?
Yes. Well, don't forget, the Samaritans was actually in Novi Sad. So therefore, you were training the Samaritans. But I didn't speak the language. So I was training the Samaritans who did speak the language so that they could train other people together with, they could speak to the refugees who didn't speak English. I could speak to the refugees who did speak English, but obviously not those that couldn't.
And before we go on to South Africa, you want to talk about, what were your aims in prison? I mean, going into Wormwood, what was the aim of it? Presumably they have a counselling service in prison.
Yes, this wasn't a counselling service. This was very much a support, listening. It was being a listening ear. It was listening to people who you wouldn't normally stand, you meet a murderer. What do you say to somebody who's murdered, who was raped, or who's, committed a crime, other crimes? What do you say to somebody? And I met people who, I'm not saying necessarily the murderers, but I met people. Remember seeing a guy called Freddie who couldn't read and write. I remember saying to him, "Freddie, you're here in the prison. You're here in Wordwood Scrubs. For how long?" He says, "Yeah, I've got it banged up for 3 years." So I said, "For 18 months, you'll get out on good behavior." And he says, yes, I will. So I said to him, "Well, Freddie, why don't you maybe learn to read and write while you're in prison? Why not?" And he said to me, "Oh, I can't do that. I'm 40 years old." And I remember saying to Freddie, "You can if you want to, if you believe in yourself." And I believe that you can. That was the end of that conversation. Fast forward 3 months, I went to see him 6 weeks later. They'd been banged up for 24 hours. 6 weeks after that, making it 3 months, Freddie comes over to me and says, "Hello, ma'am, miss." Everybody's miss. "Hello, miss, do you remember me?" And I go like, "Oh, hello, yeah, hi, Freddie, how are you doing?" He said, "I'm fine." He said, "I want to show you something. Will you come up to my cell?" So I said, no, don't do coming out to cells. I'll stay where I am. And he said to me, he came down with his book, Janitor John. He read the first page to me. He also had a letter from his little boy, Jimmy, who had written to him and said, "Dear Jimmy, dear Daddy, I love you very much." And honestly, it brings tears to my eyes even now, that particular instance. And then I said something to him because I needed to know. I needed to know what actually drove him, what motivated him. Why now? The man's 40 years old. Why now was he going to learn to read and write? And do you know what he said to me, Eleanor? He said to me, Carole, Miss, no one's ever said to me they believed in me before.
Gosh.
And that's just so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I tell that story on platform to many people because everybody has that ability to do something for somebody else, and you never know exactly what that's going to be.
Did you know, I think it's a new chat up line, come up to my cell, I want to show you something. A brilliant chat up line. It didn't work though, did it?
No.
Did you know what they were in there for? I mean,
I'd say to them, what are you in for? And it was a bit like, yeah, I'm in for felony, whatever it is. So I'd be told what they're in for. So
right.
Yeah. And it really stretches you for being non-judgmental. And I train people to be non-judgmental. And that's the one example of Freddie that I always give, and to say, this is the one time going into the scrubs, it really taxes the skill set of being non-judgmental. I wasn't there as judge and jury. I wasn't a magistrate. I wasn't a judge. I was there to listen. I was there to give empathy. I was there to understand, appreciate, and give support. That was my role, very clearly. End of.
Does the prison service have a counselling arm? I mean, do they?
It probably does. They have psychologists. So yes, yeah.
Now, what about South Africa?
Oh, South Africa, my love. Okay, South Africa. Michael, my partner, and I went to South Africa in 2005. Went on a vacation. It was lovely. And saw gorgeous scenery and how it was there, and met lovely people, and everything's very lush and beautiful. The scenery was amazing. And then I remember saying to Michael, how do we get to see the real people? Because as you go there as a tourist, it's lovely and everything's gorgeous, and the houses there are fabulous, and the hotels, etc. So I remember, I spoke to somebody in one of the guest houses. He said to me, why don't you go and see this man called Yaki, who works, a white South African, who's a doctor who works on the South African townships. We met up with Yaki, even though Michael said to me, my partner, who is this man we were going to see? I said, well, he's fine. He's absolutely fine. I know.
Was this post the end of apartheid?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So we went to meet Yaki, and he took us around to see various people who live on the township, and that's where everything changed. I thought, this is where I want to work. This is where I really want to work.
So what did you do?
I was then introduced to somebody who heads up a charity in South Africa, just outside Cape Town, so along the garden route. And I actually I was introduced to Anthea Rousseau, and she said to me when we met her on that trip, she said to me just before we came back to the UK, I went to meet her, and I said to her, what can I do to help? I'm so taken by everybody here and the people who are the entrepreneurs who are trying to do things for themselves. I'm really, really caught up with this. What can I do to help, Anthea? And this was in December 2005.
And you're talking about working within an African township?
Yes. So she said to me, we could do with some of your skill set. I said, what sort of skill set do you want? So she said, well, our young entrepreneurs need to be trained. Can you do that? This was December 2005. And I said, without even thinking, I said, yes. Mm-hmm. So she said, well, when will you come? So I said to her, Easter 2006. So Michael and I go out there, Easter 2006, we run a training course on a township called Khayelitsha, one of the largest townships in South Africa, and the rest becomes history. I then ran training courses there, and we used to go out there, Michael and I would go out there 1 month a year. Every December, we'd go out there, and I'd be working with people and coaching people and giving them support and helping with selling their little micro businesses. And we're still in contact with them today. So
were those businesses, did they have a future? Were they successful?
Some of them have, and the ones I'm not in contact with, the answer is I don't know. But the people I am in contact with via WhatsApp, it still continues, and had contact yesterday from one lady who needed us to help her write her CV. She's applying for a job. So therefore, in that situation, you can see that, yes, it makes a difference. And that's really, if you're asking what I'm all about, to try and make that small difference to somebody else. And that's what is meaningful for me.
Were they generally optimistic, I suppose, after the end of apartheid? Or, I mean,
the people that I would be working with would have, shall I say, a feel for wanting to do something to improve themselves. They were determined, they were motivated. And let's just be clear, I was working in a township. I was not working in a shanty town. A shanty town are the corrugated iron roofs where people may be on drink and drugs and very few people are working, probably haven't got hot and cold running water. I was on a township, and I'm not saying that they had baths and showers because they didn't, but there you have people who were, it's a community. A township is a community, and people get the wrong idea about townships. So when I talk about townships, when I'm on platform or I write about townships, you have to take away the impression, you'd have to take away the idea of townships, everybody's drunk or not working or on drugs. No, it's not true. Township is a community, and we have an awful lot to learn from a South African township. We do.
What in particular?
About the aspect of community, the aspect of doing things for each other, talking over the garden fence, speaking to each other, being there for each other.
Is the church very big in a township?
Huge, huge. On every street corner, there is a church, every street corner.
Right.
And we were invited to Christmas celebrations. Michael, we went to on one occasion, we went into a township and we just heard some singing. And we walked in and there was dancing and singing. And I said to Michael, right, I'm going to join in. And Michael's taking pictures and video, which we still got to this very day. And there I am, white woman from where I was living in Stanmore at the time, on a township with black women, black men. And it's a bit like, you had to do a bit of a double take. How did I get here? What am I doing here? And I have to say, when I look at those videos, I go like, oh, that was amazing.
Do you see any other white people? I mean, is there a presence in there? I've no idea.
Not really. Not really. Not really. Some. But we actually lived on a township. On one occasion, we went to South Africa, and one of the ladies that we visited said, why don't you actually come and live with me for a few days over the road? Yes. And I said to Michael, I said, well, what do you reckon? He goes like, no. I said, yeah. And we did. And we stayed there, very many years, maybe for 2 or 3 days. I can actually say I've lived on a township. Albeit it's a short space of time, but it's enough to see and get a feel for the community. And community is what I believe is so very important for all of us, whether we're in the suburb, whether we're in East Finchley, in North Finchley, it doesn't matter. Community and being there for each other and communication is key to everything, absolutely everything. And the township is a perfect example.
And is the township regulated by government? I mean, where are the hospitals, the police station?
There are hospitals there. There are hospitals there. Yes, there are hospitals there. There are schools there. It is a community.
Right.
Police, fire, ambulance. That's all in a township.
Right. How fascinating.
Yeah. And people really don't necessarily appreciate what a township is. And
there's a very good distinction between a township and a shanty town.
Absolutely, yes.
And I know you worked for Crisis over Christmas last year. How did you find that?
Very rewarding, very satisfying. So while everyone was having their Christmas lunches, I was working at Crisis up the road here, or just around the corner in the suburb, and met people. I think it's quite humbling. Because, and why it's humbling is you meet people that if you walked past them at Waitrose or Marks and Spencer's, the chances are you'd walk past them. And even if they had the big issue, which you may buy on one occasion, you may buy because you bought it, the chances are you're not going to stop and have a chat. When you're working at Crisis, and I did it for a week over Christmas, when you're working at Crisis, you actually, the people sitting around tables, people have just had lunch, and I would go over to them and I'd say to them, do you mind if I sit down? And that was such a huge difference to me, Because if they're in the street, you may walk past them. You put them in a school, which is where we were, crisis over Christmas, and the whole dynamics completely change. Completely
you
change.
are also then in a contained situation.
Exactly.
I mean, when you
contained and controlled. Yes.
A bit the worse for drink outside Waitrose.
Yes, I get that.
That's,
I get that.
You are also more vulnerable, but in
yes, and I understand that. And this is a controlled situation. And the crises are very careful in terms of our safety, in terms of our, being very aware of looking after yourself, being aware of the things that you've said, because you meet somebody on the street, it's very different to when you're actually meeting them in a controlled, contained environment. So really, it is so. But it was just, it's that moment when you think to yourself.
I used to work in a church, volunteer that served lunches to anyone who wanted to come. And they mostly didn't like the crisis at Christmas thing. They felt they were institutionalized, whereas in their everyday life, they had their favorite door that, recess in a shop. They found it difficult to adjust to the regime.
It is difficult to adjust. Yeah, it is difficult to adjust. And I think that I used to work for Crisis at the weekends, and we used to go to the Strand. And on a Saturday, you'd walk down the Strand, you'd find people in the Boots the chemist doorway. And on the Sunday, so on the Saturday, you'd ask people, what is it they needed? Did you need a coat? Did you need a rucksack, etc., etc.? And then on the Sunday, you would deliver it, and you would deliver it to man, Bill, George, Ben, doorway, Boots the chemist in the Strand. That was his where he was living. So you may say to, why did he not go to a hostel? Well, because hostels aren't always safe. You get your money taken from you in the hostels. You may have abuse in hostels. It doesn't make it right. It just makes it fact. So therefore, I'd meet people who would choose to actually sleep on the streets because they'd say it was safer. Well, I have to take their word.
That's what I heard in the lunch place for the homeless. They felt safer and independent, of course.
Yes.
Did you sleep over?
No. I did years ago when I went via the Samaritans. I did a residential service. This one was go there at 9 o'clock in the morning, leave at 6 o'clock. So that was a whole day, and I came back and slept, which is also you have to get your mind around it. You go into different places and then you come back home. So whether that was Russia, whether it's South Africa, whether it's with Crisis, and then you come back home into your lovely homes and your garden and all the things that I love, and I really do. And I'm not saying I feel guilty about it, but I am saying that you have to adjust, and it's not always that easy to adjust.
What is there left for you to expend your energy, other than Youth 3A? What else is there that you would still like to do?
I can't answer that. What I would say to you is where there's a need and where I feel that I have a purpose and I can add value and I can help, then I'm your girl. I'll be there because I am blessed with a lot of energy. I'm blessed with the ability to speak. May not be the greatest speaker in the world, but I can open my mouth. And because of that, I like campaigning because there are plenty of people who can't speak, who can't open their mouths. And so therefore, I feel that I am going to carry their baton. So whatever it is that they want to say and do, then I can actually speak up about it.
Now, the only outsider in this conversation is Richard, our chair, who seems to have been listening very intently. Richard, did you want to speak to Carole at all about anything? Or
first of all, I want to know why you're saying I'm the only outsider.
Because there's my partner and Carole's partner. There's no one else to join.
I'm still listening very actively.
I'm so sorry, Neng. Sorry, how could I? And Neng is listening in.
But there are 9 people on this.
Yes, there are. Yes.
Well,
anyway, over to you, Richard. Anything to ask me?
Anyway.
Where are the 9? I don't know where they are. Anyway.
Well, not exactly.
I'm here.
I think it's, first of all,
Oh,
I
hi,
want to say thank
Valerie.
you.
Oh,
Oh,
that's
hello,
nice.
Valerie.
Yeah.
I want to thank you, because I found this wonderful and eye-opening about all that you've done and your abilities. What the some of the quotes, some of the things I've jotted down that you've said are so relevant to the U3A. You said everyone has the ability to do something for someone else. Well, that's us. We aim to do things for other people, and the importance of community and the importance of communication. So I'm sure I'll be in touch about things you can do for the U3A. But I suppose actually my question, because going back to the beginning, I'm not clear how most of your time currently is occupied.
Okay, most of I split my time between paid work and involuntary and volunteering. So therefore, I'm still working in industry, so I'm traveling. And not as much as I used to, but I'm still traveling. I used to work in the Middle East. Didn't mention that over those many years, but I'm not doing that anymore. So therefore, the work that is in industry is there. I still have my volunteering work, which I hold very, very dear to my heart. And I support U3A because of the very reasons that you've actually given. I really believe in community. I'm living in the suburb. I love the community in the suburb. I love Fellowship House. In fact, I'm a few doors away from it. It engages with me. It speaks to me. I love my garden. It's green, it's verdant. It's the right place for me to be. I love it. Not like, Richard, love. And I really support U3A and very happy. I'm the kind of person that is able to stretch her time. So if there's something I can do to help as far as U3A is concerned, apart from a lot of administrations, I haven't got time for that, but something that you think might be of value, then by all means, just ping me an email, pick up the phone and ask me a question.
I'll be in touch. Okay, thank you.
Neng, sorry, Richard.
No, that's
something
it.
else you wanted to say?
No.
Sorry. Neng, was it you that sent in the message about listening?
Yes, I have sent you those.
Okay, off you go.
Hi, Carole.
Hi.
Hi. It's very interesting to hear about your part. Your over 20 years of being a Samaritan. Other than the most harrowing and obviously very serious calls you received during that time, was there ever a time that you had the most light-hearted call? I know there would be far and few between, but could you recall a very light-hearted one?
I can certainly give you the serious ones. Okay, that's not what you're asking me. Okay, I got that. Light-hearted. I would say, because you're working in a team, Richard, it comes back, the Samaritans as a community. I'm drawn to communities yet again. I think the thing is, if something happened on the phone, sometimes you would actually get in the team of people, your team, yes, your rota, you sometimes would get some black humor, because that's your way of coping with some of the difficult situations. So I would say light-hearted. Somebody may call you and just to say, phone, I can't. Do you know something? I don't think people necessarily would call us at the Samaritans to tell us that they were having a good time.
Because I'm on a one-to-one Zoom.
So, and also you have to say is that even in my role as a counsellor, people don't turn up on my doorstep because they're having a fabulous time. It doesn't happen. I don't see people that are happy. Hopefully, after I've worked with them, that they are happier and have a greater appreciation of who they are and their partner, etc. But, people don't necessarily the answer is I haven't got an off the cuff having a good time. But I have to say what was amazing, and this is important, the community at the Samaritans, the volunteers, was second to none. Absolutely. I've still got very close friends that are still my close friends, because what you had there was you just carried on with.
I admire that sort of courage that you have, and you and your fellow Samaritans, because I'm sure there must be times when you must be so traumatized by some of the calls. And how do you get over that? I just can't
well, there's a process. And there's a process for that. Every shift has a shift leader. Every shift leader has a supervisor. Every supervisor has a supervisor. You are never left with a difficult call. And yes, there were many, many difficult calls, but you're never actually left with it.
Actually, no, you do a lot of work with charities, don't you? Do a lot of, don't you? I think.
Yeah, Well, in my role as just an ICT support man in supporting tech, help for the elderly and some very young people who have learning disabilities. Yes, having that, just to be able to listen to a problem without having to talk over them, that is my main challenge, really. Because, in your passion, your enthusiasm, you try to give an answer straight away. But really, the main thing is to be the big ear and have a very small mouth and just keep listening.
Two ears, one mouth. Right.
Actually, I have a question for you, Ning.
Yeah, can I ask, Carole, did you come across Stanley and Dina Lawfer in the 35s? Because they were going to and from the Soviet Union, and they arranged for a lot of people to write letters. And we wrote to people in similar professions. So I was put in touch with a lawyer, and I corresponded with him for a long time. Sometimes his letters would come in a bunch, obviously all sent and read. And he eventually finished up in Israel. And he found it a great support to have somebody writing to him and caring about him.
And the name is very familiar. The reason why we used to write letters, and knowing that they wouldn't get delivered, was because every time a letter didn't get delivered, we would actually claim against the post office.
Yes.
So we became like a thorn in the side of the KGB, and we really were. And people got very fed up with us. And I just think, let the KGB get fed up with us. That's really fine. They can get fed up with us. So you're writing and thinking, oh gosh, this is not going to be delivered. And this is pre-computers. So you had to handwrite all your letters. I have got a bunch of letters that had been sent back to me after I wrote to Edward Markov in Leningrad, and I still got them with me in the house.
Well, my letters did get sent eventually because, as you said, we would claim against the post office.
Exactly.
If they weren't delivered.
Yes.
And they did get there in the end, and they were very grateful for it.
Yes.
What do you mean claim against the post office? What does that mean? Sorry.
There was a special sort of insurance cover where if your letters weren't delivered abroad, they would make inquiries and they would find out, and you were supposed to be compensated. As Carole said, it wasn't worth KGB's while to keep, getting in.
It was just, we're annoyed. I mean, we always regard the 35s as being a thorn in the side of the KGB and of the authorities. And the answer is yes, we were. We were an annoyance, but a particular annoyance. And I remember another story. I remember saying to Rita on one occasion when the Bolshoi Ballet were coming over, and I said, we need to do a demonstration. And so she said, well, fine, we need to do a demonstration. I said, well, we should do a demonstration from Hyde Park Corner right down to the Russian embassy. So people can see us and they can get into the media. And we were always known as the women in black. Why? Because we always wore black. It was very simple. So the press actually nicknamed us the women in black. So Rita says to me, great idea about the demonstration. You know what's going to come next. She then says to me, okay, Carole, off you go and do it. I said, well, I've never ever done a demonstration before. She said, well, you go to Scotland Yard, you go down there, introduce yourself as to who you are, wear black, look very, very professional, and get it sorted. And I thought, okay, well, the answer was I did. And we ran demonstrations from Hyde Park Corner down to the Russian embassy on a regular basis. And we got so many people involved. I remember running these fundraising events fundraising events so we could spend money on clothing so people could take that out to the refuseniks. And on one occasion, I had this idea about running a sponsored silence for my children. Now, my children at that time were like 5 years old, 8 years old, and one thing they don't do is keep quiet. We ran a sponsored silence. They remember it to this very, very day, a sponsored silence, and they were stum. They were quiet. They said nothing, and we got money because of that. So that was one of our little fundraising events, which my kids, as young as they were at that particular point, they're now very old, much older, they remember that to this very day. Sponsored silence. Who would have thought a kid with the attitude of, I still think it's a good idea.
Richard, did you want to come back with another question?
I was only going to ask Ning, actually. So this talk is recorded, as pretty well all of them have been. And if people look at the recording, do we have a record of how many have looked, or is it unknown?
I wouldn't know.
No, we don't. That's simply the only simple answer I can give. But it's because of the temporary nature of the link and to the amount of storage that we have
No,
on
fine.
our account.
Okay, I just wondered.
I can only
Anyway,
send you back the
I'm
temporary link.
going to commit to Eleanor and Carole that I will make sure that more people see this talk, because I thought it was great. Thank you.
Can it not go onto YouTube?
I
it'll
can
be-
download it and upload it only if we got a YouTube account.
Which you haven't got? You 3A don't have a YouTube account?
If there is like a commercial account that we have, then I can upload it so people can share it, or I can put it on the Google Drive and then share it that way. But other than that, I don't
Well,
know.
I'm more than happy to put it. I'm more than happy to put it into my YouTube account, and then you can send
Okay.
people to it if you want to.
Yep, I can send you the
Okay.
link and you can
It's-
download it and do whatever you like with your file.
Right, but it's not that people can't see it; they can see it. It's just that we don't have a record of them having seen it.
Yeah. Well, you see, the thing is, Richard, if it's onto YouTube, then you know exactly who's seen it, because then you get your
Yeah.
comments as well.
Okay, that would be very helpful.
Yeah.
Well, I think you've been a real tour de force, Carole. I'm very glad I invited you to come along. I mean, it was really terrific, and you've covered a very wide spectrum of your events. Fascinated what you're going to do next. So have you got any plans at all?
Not at this moment. I tend to see things. I'm one of those people that it's almost like it's like the law of attraction. I read something, I go onto LinkedIn, I find somebody to speak to, I find a connection. Not all the time, because obviously you haven't got so many hours in the day, and I've got a dog to take out for a walk as well. So and I've got grandchildren and children, and I'm very, very blessed to have them. So it's a bit like, what's next? I don't know. But then I didn't know with all the other things. I didn't have a plan as to what was going to happen. But you hear something, you think you can offer something. You know, I worked out in Israel on the Lebanese border at one time because I heard they needed support. I did that. Those are the sorts of things that happen because you read something, you hear something on the radio, and you think, I think I can do. And if it's of help, then you just jolly well do it. So it's carpe diem.
Well, gosh, what a wide range. Thank you very, very much for coming along tonight. It's been terrific.
My pleasure.
And I don't know what else to say. I mean, it's sort of, life seems very calm if you're not Carole Spiers. But there you go. There you go. Thank you very much, Carole.
My pleasure.
And thank you, Neng, for, I'm so glad you asked a question, because you normally sit through all these talks, not only, you know, managing the techie stuff, but not actually participating.
No, look, there he is.
My hearing was energized.
Okay, thanks, Carole, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon.
And thank you, Eleanor,
Bye.
for
My pleasure.
organising as ever.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.